that there was a sickness in our society. And like Martin Luther King, he didn't advocate any violence whatsoever, but he advocated that people start changing things.
Action! We met every Wednesday night. We went to conferences. We went to Morehouse.
Justice!
We went to Koinonia. We were just going everywhere.
Real world!
An extra university, a university that didn't have courses or grades.
Labor!
We had our own bank account. We helped people in need.
Desegregation!
We were living on the edge. They called my students
Brian and I.
Which is a slur, meaning, you know, students who were far off on a tangent.
That's what the law school students called us.
I remember this one time back in the early 50s, we all went down to the city auditorium in Macon where the Klan was having a rally.
So we went downtown.
And we took some placards saying, "Down with the Klan!" And we went to the balcony of the city auditorium and held placards against the Klan being unchristian.
I posed as a reporter and snuck into the auditorium. I saw things in there I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't seen it. You know, the Klan preaching, claiming biblical meaning into everything they did. You know, like it was all the way God wanted it to be. The terrible way they used the scriptures to prove what they believed. Some of them were the big muckety-mucks who were making speeches. They'd say they were a deacon in such Baptist church.
And one of the Klansmen looked up at us and said, "I don't blame you young men and women. It's those liberal professors at Mercer that got you thinking this way."
The Bryanites had a newsletter called Combustible Burn. Combustible/burn.
Matt paid me to type up and edit and send out a little newspaper.
It was dealing with social issues.
And a lot of that was about racial issues, and then about religion. It was so radical. You're supposed to read it and then burn it. And it was supposed to be burned after you read it to keep everybody out of trouble.
I mean, there were names there, and so-and-so has been fired from their church for preaching integration, and so-and-so was helping them. It was an underground movement that he had with his students.
We had a little mini revolution going back in the early 50s at Mercer.
From Combustible Burn.
First principle. We stand for the breakdown of all things that create a prestige-seeking class consciousness. Secret clubs, ostentatious behavior, and possessions.
Now, this is a Jesus story. Man lived in a rich house with a gate and a dog. Poor man was at the gate eating the crumbs off his table. When they died, rich man goes to hell. Poor man goes to the bosom of Abraham. And in hell, the rich man prays to God, "Please send a prophet to my rich brothers who are going to end up in hell like I am if they don't have somebody to tell them." And Jesus says that God said,
"There's a chasm fixed between you and me that no person can cross. I have already sent prophets to your brothers and to you, and you will not listen."
Bryanites.
I grew up in a little town called Oliver, Georgia.
I grew up in Statesboro, Georgia.
I was born in Cedartown, Georgia.
The Bethany community near Savannah.
Between LJ and Chatham, Full Mountain, Mountain Tap.
The Appalachian Mountains of North Georgia.
Tarleton,
Griffin. Gainesville.
Albany.
a Georgia boy.
A typical Southern Baptist Georgia girl.
My parents were quite poor.
Our houses were working class houses
In a poor town.
in the 1930s.
My father was a tenant farmer.
Mother took in sewing, and when I was 11, worked in a parachute plant. It was the Depression years, and I saw the world through the eyes of the underclass. Janice and I were friends in Griffin Elementary School. I met Carol in the 4th grade, and she had long blonde hair, corkscrew curls, and looked like Shirley Temple, and I hated her. We grew up in Griffin, Georgia. It was a really poor town, lots of mills, and both my parents worked. One in a hosiery shop, and the other in Crawford Holland corduroy, making corduroy and velvet. It was the kind of job I would not want. My dad, he was always aware of the injustice because he was always talking about the mills. And in the 40s, he joined a march to try and get the union at the mill. And Jan told me that her father told her not to play with me because my dad was a communist. Her father was a union organizer, had something to do with the union. And he didn't know what communists were. My dad probably didn't know what a communist was. But people just hung that on me. I just knew that Carol was a wonderful person, and that's all I thought about. And her dad was a supervisor at another mill. So he was a little higher up than my dad. My father was very loyal to the mill. He worked there 50 years, I guess, and when he retired, he had about $30 a month. I was always just aware of the injustice between the rich and the poor. And the rich having such control over the poor in that mill town. My sense of injustice came from the mills. Her father worked in the mills, but Carol didn't live in the village. We lived in what was called a mill village, and I was a mill girl, and you know, all the houses were practically alike. We lived half a block away from the mill in the shadow of the stadium. And in those days, there was a great distinction between the mill people and the town people. And that was something that just sort of stayed with me through the years. We were considered lower than the town people. When I was 5 or 6 years old, my mom took me, I took dancing lessons with some girls in town, and my mother took me in town when they was playing. As we were playing, they suggested,
You play the maid, and we'll play the ladies in pants.
and so I got the message. And you don't want to know how I felt. I felt horrible. It was like a brand, you know? You could hear the sizzle.
Let me tell you what really brings it home to me. The Washington Park, across from the Washington Memorial Library, the fountains are still there. In the spring and in the summer, the fountains would just be so beautiful. Little white kids would be paddling in the water, the wading pool at the fountain. And I can remember just standing there, looking at that park, not being able to wade in the water with the beautiful fountains. And the grass was the greenest grass I'd ever seen in my life. And I couldn't do that. It was a look-at park. Do not try and wade in the water. That park was a little piece of heaven that I could not enter. It was because I was black. That's a childhood memory.
Let me give you my definition of how people arrive at justice. Every child, even in his pre-verbal stage, derives a sense of justice from the first act of injustice committed against its psyche. And it registers an indelible imprint on its psyche forever. See, once you've been treated unjustly, you cry to the heavens. You cry to the empty spaces. Where is there an answer? That's where the sense of justice is born. I say that's where God's born.
Combustible burn. Second principle.
We stand for the complete integration of all people with equal opportunities beginning in our homes and with every newborn child.
My mother died when I was 6 months old, and a black nanny took care of me.
I guess you call it nanny nowadays.
Her name was Bessie Redden.
Her name was Polly Benfield.
Carrie Johnson.
Annie Blunt.
Hazel Brixton.
She raised me.
And she was almost as important as my mother because
She raised me. She took care of me. She taught me manners.
if I had to pick somebody to be with, I'd be with her.
She made a very profound impression on me as a child.
One of my favorite people in all the world.
And I absolutely loved her.
I loved her deeply.
Even at the age of 4, I realized that she didn't sit with the rest of the family when she sang. You know? I became aware of that. And I asked the folks to let her eat with us. I remember asking my mother about that, and they said, no, she would not be comfortable. That's the kind of answer I got. But from that moment on, I can believe that that was justice. Because I loved her so much. She was very important in my life.
My mother did work as a maid for quite a while, maybe 10 years. She hated it. She would say that being a maid was really a question of survival. I don't think she liked the idea that other people didn't see her as a human being. You know, this is weird. I don't know why it sticks to my mind, but she said the one thing she hated was washing other women's underwear, because they would simply leave them on the floor. She thought that was particularly degrading for some reason. She would have to go around the house picking up underwear to wash. One day, she quit. I think I was in college then, and she asked for a day off to go carry me to school, and her person that she worked for told her.
No, you've got your eye on my dresses and get dinner ready for the guests.
And my mother said to me, here I am taking care of someone else's kids, and I have latchkey kids. And my mother said, well, this is a defining moment in my son's life, and so I'm going. And I think when that hit her, she just basically walked away.
I remember we had an African-American maid. She gave me my first clue of the injustice. I was about 5 years old, and she said,
Mr. Lawrence, see that mule out there doing all the work, plowing the cornfields?
yes, ma'am.
See that horse over there out in the field, grazing the flowers and the grass?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, that horse is you white folk, and that mule is us black folk. We do all the work, but you get all the money.
And that's when I realized the inequality of it all.
So, Lawrence worked with black students in town.
My royal ambassadors.
And the buses, of course, were segregated. And he ran immediately into segregated town because when he went on with the black students in his black youth group, he would sit with the black students where they sat. And the bus driver would raise hell.
Said I didn't belong back there. Said I had to come up front and sit with the white people.
Mister, if you're going to ride this bus, go on and move to the front seats.
I'm with these students as one of them. No, I'll stay where I am.
A black lady was riding with Lawrence and his crowd, and she's sitting in the black section like she's supposed to be and everything. And she's watching this dialogue between Lawrence and the bus driver, and she's saying,
Keep on, white boy, keep on, keep on. You're doing what's right, boy, you're right. Don't let that white driver intimidate you, because you're a white boy. You stay right where you are.
and she's really letting the whole busload know what the truth is, right? And the bus driver saying,
Lady, where do you get off? How soon you got this bus? I'm going to put you off. You don't shut up.
well, she finally gets to her getting off place. And as she's going down the steps as slowly as she can parade her dignity, she finally gets to the bottom of the step. The bus driver saying,
Get off. Get off. I got a schedule I got to meet.
black lady turns around, she looked at the bus driver in the face, she said,
Mr. Bus Driver, don't you worry. God has a schedule, too.
doesn't that sound like something straight out of Amos? Ah, don't worry, buddy. God has a schedule, too.
My mother, my grandmother, and I got on a bus. And the bus driver said to my grandmother, "Hurry and sit down, woman. Who's in the back of the bus?" My mother went to the back of the bus and tears rolled down her cheeks. Because her mother, this humble, loving lady, had been treated so harshly. And I sat there and watched my mother cry. And my grandmother said, "Don't worry, honey. I'm used to it."
Combustible burn, third principle.
We stand for the free, honest, and rigorous pursuit of truth and exchange of ideas in a fearless forum.
My grandfather, he was an arch segregationist and was astounded by my views on race. He was ready to disown me.
My mother heard about my activism on race at Mercer and wrote me a letter. She called me an ugly duckling.
My dad was a deacon in the First Baptist Church in Gainesville, and he would just get so upset when I get on the race issue that he would run to the bathroom and throw up. And Mother would say,
"See what you've done? His ulcer is going to bleed again, and you'll be the cause of it."
See, Jesus was terribly hard on the family. They came up to him and said, "Your mother and your brothers want you to get out."